The girl's voice cut through the noise of the Granville Street intersection like it didn't belong there. Sir, stop! It was small. Maybe 8 years old, that voice. The kind of voice that hadn't yet learned it wasn't supposed to address strangers. Harrison Alderton didn't hear it at first. He was thinking about the Mercer deposition, about the paragraph on page 44 that didn't hold up the way he'd written it, about whether Margaret would still be awake when he got home, or whether she would have gone to bed with the lights off the way she did now when he was late, which was most nights. He was thinking about all of this while he walked, which is what he had been doing for 31 years as a senior partner at Caldwell Alderton LLP, and he had gotten very good at it, moving through a city while thinking about something else entirely. Sir, please. He stopped, not because of the word, because of the please. There was something in it that wasn't polite. It was frightened. He turned. She was standing on the sidewalk just behind him, near the edge of the curb. Small, thin, wearing a coat that was too big for her. A man's coat, dark blue, belted with a piece of rope. Her shoes were canvas, the kind that had been white once. Her hair was pulled back but coming loose on one side's end. She was holding a plastic bag in both hands, pressed against her chest like a shield. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking past him toward the intersection. Harrison turned to follow her gaze. The light had been red. He had walked into the intersection on red. He hadn't seen it, because he had been looking at his phone, which was now in his hand, which he had no memory of taking out. The car that had stopped was a white sedan, and its driver was staring at him through the windshield with an expression Harrison recognized. It was the expression of a person who has just experienced something they would be describing for weeks. He stepped back onto the sidewalk. His heart was doing something fast and irregular. He looked down at the girl. She was still watching him. Not with the look of someone who had done something remarkable, with the look of someone who was checking that it had worked. "You okay?" she asked. He stopped. "Yes, thank you." She nodded, once, shifted the plastic bag to one arm. "You weren't looking," she said. It wasn't an accusation. She said it the way a person states a fact they are not sure the other person knows. "I wasn't," Harrison said. She looked at the bag in her arms, then back at him and seemed to be deciding something. "Okay," she said. "Okay, good." And then she started walking in the direction he had just come from, back along Granville, small and deliberate and unhurried. Harrison stood on the sidewalk and watched her go. He did not know her name. He did not know where she was going. He did not know where she had come from, or why she had been standing at that particular corner, at that particular moment, or what she was carrying in the plastic bag. Though it seemed important, whatever it was, by the way she held it. He watched her until she turned the corner by the pharmacy and disappeared. Then he called Margaret. She answered on the second ring, which meant she was still up, which meant tonight was not one of the lights-off nights, and he felt something loosen very slightly in his chest. "I'm going to be a bit late," he said. "You already are." "I know. He paused. "I wanted to hear your voice." There was a silence on the line. "Harrison," she said, "are you all right?" "I think so," he said. "I'll explain when I get home." He did not explain when he got home. He tried over the reheated dinner Margaret had left covered on the stove, but it came out wrong. He said a girl on Granville had stopped him from stepping in front of a car, and Margaret set down her fork and looked at him with the expression that meant she was deciding how alarmed to be, and he said it was fine. He was fine. And she said he had seemed distracted lately, and he said he knew, and they ate the rest of the meal without speaking, which was not unusual, and he went to bed thinking about page 44, and the girl, and what was in the bag. In the morning, he had a meeting with the Mercer team at 8, and then a client call at 10, and then a lunch he had agreed to and immediately regretted with a colleague from the Vancouver Bar Association who liked to talk about golf. He drove downtown and parked in the building garage and rode the elevator up to the 14th floor and said good morning to the receptionist, whose name he had known for 6 years and was called Bethany, and he walked to his office and closed the door and sat down. He thought, "I should feel worse about yesterday." He didn't know what he meant by that. He thought he meant. A man who nearly walks into traffic should be shaken, should sit still for a moment, should not immediately organize his next 12 hours and proceed through them as if it had been a minor inconvenience. But he had done exactly that. He had eaten dinner and gone to bed and woken up at 5:45 and made coffee and looked at the Mercer file and driven downtown. The girl had said, "Sir." She had said, "Please." She had stood on the sidewalk with a bag pressed to her chest, watching him with eyes that were calm and serious. And then she had walked away. He opened his laptop. He looked at the Mercer file. He was 58 years old. He had 31 years at this firm. He had a house in Kerrisdale with a kitchen Margaret had finally renovated 2 years ago, and a study full of case files, and a car he barely drove because the downtown parking had gotten too expensive. and 2 sons who called on Sundays sometimes, not always, and a wife who still occasionally laughed at things he said, which he considered the best possible measure of a marriage health. He had a life, a full one, and he had almost stepped out of it while thinking about page 44. He closed the laptop. He sat there for a moment. Then he picked up his phone and texted his assistant. "Is there anything on my calendar Thursday morning before 10? She texted back. "You have a call at 9:15, but it can move." "Why?" he typed. "I want to take a walk." She texted back 3 seconds later. He put the phone face down on the desk and opened the laptop again. He walked Granville on Thursday morning. He did not know what he was expecting. He was not, he told himself, expecting anything. He just wanted to walk. He had not walked for the sake of walking in years. Every walk had a purpose: to the office, to the parking garage, to the lunch he didn't want, to the coffee meeting he had agreed to in a moment of social obligation he couldn't remember. This walk had no purpose. He bought a coffee from the place on Davie that had the uncomfortable stools and the very good espresso, and he walked north along Granville, with the cup in his hand, looking at things. The restaurant that had changed names twice in the years he'd been walking past it. The pawn shop with the guitars in the window, 3 of them, arranged by size. He stopped at the intersection. It looked ordinary in the morning. Gray sky, damp pavement, a few cyclists. The light was green and the cars were moving, and there was no white sedan and no girl in a too big coat. He stood there for a moment anyway. He finished his coffee. He was turning to leave when he saw her. She was sitting on a piece of flattened cardboard near the entrance to the pharmacy, the plastic bag beside her, and she was eating something from a paper wrapper, a muffin, it looked like, or a scone, eating it slowly and carefully, tearing small pieces. She saw him at approximately the same moment. Neither of them moved for a second. Then she said, "You came back." "I was walking," he said, which was true. She considered this. Okay. He looked at the cardboard she was sitting on. He looked at the plastic bag. He looked at the coat. Still too big, still belted with the same piece of rope. "Do you live here?" he asked. "Near here, I mean." She tore another piece of muffin. Sort of. I stay in different places," she said. "Depends. On what?" She looked up at him. "On lots of things." He stood there. He was wearing his good coat, the one he'd cleaned in September, and his briefcase was over his shoulder, and he was aware of how much space he took up in the world, how visible he was, and how small she was against the pharmacy wall. "I'm Harrison," he said. She looked at him for a moment. "Nadia," she said. "How old are you, Nadia?" 9. He nodded. He didn't know what to do with 9. Is there someone who looks after you?" "I look after myself," she said, not defensive. Just a statement of fact, the way she'd said you weren't looking. A thing that was true. He stood there another moment. He said, "I'm going to get another coffee. Do you want anything?" She looked at him. "Hot chocolate," she said. "If they have it." "They have it," he said. He brought her the hot chocolate and a sandwich from the case at the counter, the turkey one with the dark bread, and she accepted both without comment. She moved the plastic bag to one side to make room on the cardboard and did not invite him to sit, but she didn't tell him not to, either. He sat on the low planter ledge near the pharmacy door. She ate the sandwich efficiently, like a person who had learned not to be uncertain about food. "What's in the bag?" he asked. She swallowed. "Things? Important things?" "To me." She looked at the bag. "My mum's sweater, a book, some socks, a toothbrush, a photo." She paused. "A coin." "What kind of coin?" "A toonie," she said, "but it's not for spending." She said this with a certainty that suggested the distinction had been tested. He said, "A toonie you don't spend." "My dad gave it to me," she said, "when I was little. He said, keep it so you always have something." She looked at the bag. He didn't know it would be the only thing. Harrison didn't say anything. The light changed at the intersection. A woman pushed a stroller past them, talking on her phone. "Where is your dad now?" he asked. "Gone," she said. 5 years ago. "And your mum?" She was quiet for a moment. "She got sick," she said. "Last winter. She picked up the hot chocolate. She's still here, but she's not." She stopped. "It's hard to explain." "You don't have to," he said. "I know," she said. They sat in the absence of those sentences for a while. He went back on Monday. He told himself he was walking again, that it was good for him, that the coffee on Davie was better than the coffee at the office, which was true. He went back on Wednesday. He went back on Friday. By the second week, Nadia had stopped looking surprised when she saw him. She was not, he came to understand, entirely without resources. She knew the shelter on Burrard that let children stay without an adult until 7:30 in the morning. She knew which Tim Hortons didn't say anything if she sat inside for a couple of hours in the afternoon. She knew the church on Nelson that did the Wednesday lunches and the food bank on Robson that opened early on Tuesdays. She knew things the way people who have needed to know them know things, completely, without the margin for error that the rest of the world operates on. She was 9 years old and she had built herself a system and she was living inside it. This was what Harrison could not stop thinking about. Not the fact of it. He knew that children lived this way. He had read about it, signed checks for organizations that addressed it, attended the occasional fundraising dinner. He had known it in the abstract, general way you can know something that is not happening in front of you. Nadia was happening in front of him. "What do you do during the day?" he asked her, the second Friday. "Walk mostly," she said. "I go to the library on Robson in the afternoon when it's open. It's warm." She paused. "I like it. Do you read?" "I read everything," she said with a particular emphasis of someone for whom this is a non-negotiable fact about themselves. "What are you reading now?" "I finished the one I had." She looked at the plastic bag. "I need a new one." "What kind?" She thought about it. "Something that happens," she said. "Not just people talking about their feelings. Something where things actually happen." He said, "I know exactly what you mean." He brought her a book the following Monday. A used copy of Hatchet that he had found at a shop on Broadway. Battered and creased the way books get when they've been loved by several people in sequence. She turned it over in her hands, read the back, read the first page right there on the sidewalk. "This is good," she said. "It gets better," he said. She looked up. "Have you read it?" "My son was 12, he said. He read it 4 times in one winter. Wouldn't put it down." She looked at the book, then at him. "Do you have kids?" he said. "They're grown now, in their 30s. Do you see them?" He paused. "Not as much as I should." She nodded, like this was something she understood. She put the book in the plastic bag carefully, next to the sweater. "Thank you," she said. He said, "You're welcome." He stood up. He was going to be late for a partners' meeting that had been on the calendar for 3 weeks. He picked up his briefcase. "Harrison," she said. He turned. "The book is good," she said, "but she could probably use some gloves." She looked at her hands, which were reddish from the cold. "Just as a general observation." He looked at her hands. "As a general observation," he said. "Yeah." He bought her gloves that afternoon. Black ones, fleece-lined, at the outdoor shop on Granville. He felt slightly ridiculous standing there asking the young man at the register for children's gloves in a size 9-year-old, and the young man had said, "We don't really size them that way, sir." And Harrison had said, "I understand that. Just show me what you have." And he had bought 2 pairs because he wasn't sure of the size. Both pairs fit. It was a Tuesday in late October when he came, and she wasn't there. He stood at the corner by the pharmacy for 20 minutes, which was longer than he usually stayed. He walked to the Tim Hortons on Seymour and looked through the window without going in. He walked to the library on Robson and asked at the desk if they'd seen a girl 9, small, blue coat. The woman at the desk had looked at him in a way he understood was reasonable and said she couldn't share information about patrons. He went back to the pharmacy corner. She wasn't there. He had no phone number for her. He had no last name. He had no way to find her except to come back. He came back Wednesday. She was there. "You weren't here yesterday," he said, and then immediately felt the wrongness of it, the possessiveness, the implication of a claim he didn't have. She looked at him with her serious eyes. "I know," she said. "Something came up. Are you all right?" "I'm fine." He looked at her. He had learned over these weeks that her face was not easy to read, not because she was hiding things, but because she had gotten very good at the neutral expression, the one that cost you nothing either way. "My mum had a hard night," she said finally. "I stayed. Where is your mum?" Nadia looked at the bag. She rearranged something inside it that didn't need rearranging. "She's in a place," she said. "A care place. It's on Main." She paused. "They let me visit but not stay, so I stay outside sometimes, near the door, so she knows." Harrison stood very still. "So she knows you're there," he said. "Yeah." Nadia looked up. "She can't talk anymore, but she knows." He said nothing. He could not say anything. He was a man who had spent 31 years making arguments, and he could not find a single word that seemed adequate to put beside what she had just said. She picked up her bag. "I'm okay," she said. "You look worried." "I am," he said. "You don't have to be." "Nadia," he said, and then stopped up because he didn't know what came after her name. He didn't know what he was offering, or whether he had the right to offer it or what it would mean for both of them if he tried. She waited. "I'd like to help," he said. "If you'd let me." She looked at him for a long time. "I don't need charity," she said. "I know. I'm doing fine. I know you are." She shifted the bag. "So what do you mean help?" He thought about it. "I don't know exactly," he said. "I know a few people. A family lawyer, someone at the Children's Services office. People who might know the right way to." He stopped. "I'm not trying to put you somewhere or take anything away from you. I want to know if there's a way to make things less hard. That's all." She looked at the pharmacy door. She looked at the toonie in the small zippered pocket of the bag, which he could see from where he stood. "You'd have to meet my mum," she said. "She'd have to say it's okay. Of course. She doesn't talk," she said, "but she has a way." You'll know. Okay. She looked at him one more time, the serious eyes measuring. Thursday, she said. 2 o'clock. I'll take you. The care facility on Main Street was a modest building, clean and quiet. They went in through the front and signed Harrison in at the reception desk. And Nadia walked the hallway, with the ease of someone who knew it well, past the room with the television and the room with the plants, and the room where a man was sleeping in a chair by the window. Her mother's name was Dara. She was 32 years old. Harrison learned this from the small whiteboard beside the door. 32 years old and lying in a bed with a pillow arranged carefully behind her head, her eyes open, watching the ceiling. Nadia went to the chair beside the bed and sat down and took her mother's hand. "Mum," she said, "I brought someone." Dara's eyes moved to Harrison. He stood in the doorway. He did not come in without being invited. "His name is Harrison," Nadia said. "He's a lawyer. She paused. "He's been around. He wants to help us. I said you had to say it was okay." He watched Dara's face. It was a slow thing. What happened then? Dara's eyes moved from Nadia to Harrison. They stayed there on his face for a long moment. They were dark eyes, serious, and he recognized the seriousness because he had seen it every morning at the pharmacy corner. He didn't speak. He let her look. After a long moment, her hand tightened, very slightly, around Nadia's. And Nadia said, "Okay." It took 4 months. He called in favors he had not used in years. He spoke to a colleague who knew a judge who knew the right person at the province's Child and Family Services office. He worked with a social worker named Yvonne, who was brisk and thorough and did not let him rush anything, which he respected. There were assessments and interviews and home studies and 3 separate court appearances that Harrison attended personally, which his colleagues found unusual, which he did not explain. Margaret came to 2 of the court appearances. She had not been told exactly. She had noticed the books on the passenger seat of the car. She had noticed the gloves in the coat pocket. She had noticed him leaving earlier on Thursdays and coming home later, quieter, and she had said nothing for 6 weeks. And then one evening she'd said, "Who is she?" He told her everything. He sat at the kitchen table they had eaten at for 20 years, and he told her about the intersection and the red light and the small voice saying, "Sir, please." And Nadia, with the too big coat and the toonie her father had given her, and Dara in the room on Main Street, and the way Dara's hand had tightened. Margaret listened without interrupting, which was one of the things he had loved about her since the beginning. When he finished, she said, "What do you need from me?" He said, "I think I need you to meet her." On the last Thursday of February, a document was signed in a small room at the Provincial Family Court on Smythe Street. Yvonne was there. The judge was there. Harrison and Margaret were there. Nadia sat in a chair beside Harrison in a dark green sweater, new, not from the bag, and her hands were folded in her lap and she was not fidgeting. She was watching the proceedings with the focused attention of someone who understands that a thing is happening that will not happen again. She was still 9 years old, though only for another 3 weeks. Afterward, in the hallway, she stood with the plastic bag over her shoulder. "So now what?" she said. Harrison said, "Now we get lunch. After that, we go home. You can see the room. If you don't like it, we can change it." She looked at the bag. She looked at the hallway. "I'm keeping the toonie," she said. "Obviously," he said. "And the photo. Everything in the bag is yours," he said. "It was always yours." She was quiet for a moment. "My mum," she said. "Thursday afternoons," he said, "and Sunday mornings if you want. Yvonne worked it out." She nodded. Once. Margaret came out of the courtroom then and came down the hallway, and when she reached them, she crouched slightly so she was at Nadia's level, which Harrison had noticed she always did, and she said, "Are you hungry? There's a place on Richards that does very good soup." Nadia considered this. "What kind?" "All kinds." "Do they have tomato?" "They definitely have tomato." Nadia looked at Harrison. "Okay," she said. 6 months later, he was walking home from the office on a Thursday evening, later than he'd meant to be. He was thinking about a case, not the Mercer case, which had settled in March, but a new one, complicated in different ways. He was thinking about a paragraph that didn't hold up. He walked across the intersection at Granville without looking at his phone. He didn't think about it. He just didn't. When he got home, Nadia was at the kitchen table with a book open and a bowl of cereal she had made herself and was not eating, just present beside Margaret was at the counter. Someone had put music on low, something instrumental, from the small speaker they kept on the windowsill. Nadia looked up when he came in. "You're late," she said. "I know," he said. "There's soup," Margaret said without turning. He took off his coat and hung it on the hook by the door and came into the kitchen. Nadia looked back at her book. Her finger moved along the line she'd been on. The room was warm. The music was low. Outside, it was starting to rain, the way it did in Vancouver in September, quietly and without any particular announcement. He sat down at the table. He didn't think about page 44. He didn't think about the intersection. He just sat there, in the warm room, with the low music and the quiet rain, and he looked at the plastic bag hanging on the hook beside his coat. And the toonie was in there, he knew, and the photo, and the sweater that had been Dara's, and the book she'd finished last week that she was keeping anyway, and her toothbrush, and the 2 pairs of black fleece-lined gloves. She never moved it out of reach. He understood that. He didn't need her to change it. She would move it when she was ready, if she was ever ready, and if she never was, the bag would hang there until it was simply part of the house, which was already quietly hers.